our next speaker, Professor Jean Paul Lange. So Jean Paul spent 35 years in Shell and just told that he's retired only a few weeks ago. Spent most of that time looking at decarbonization of chemical and fuel production, leading to over 120 patents in the field. Jean Paul is still active, so he's not fully retired and has a post at Twente University as a professor. And so this morning, Fernanda mentioned Furfural as a platform chemicals. That was a quick mention. I think we'll hear a lot more about that in the next half an hour.
Thank you very much, Xavier. Yes. Retired. I think that my wife will hate that word because she doesn't believe it. And indeed, I'll try to be maybe half retired and still have really active to keep pushing the energy and the carbon transition that we are facing, and that is indeed going up and down with a high pace a couple of years ago, now slowing down because society is slowing down as well. But I think this is still a role for me to try to push into this transition. We'll be talking about Furfural, a century-old platform intermediate coming from biomass, a topic I've been working for more than 20 years now within Shell and more than 10 years at University of Twente. I'll do a really quick review of some of the highlights of typically my research. I will base it on, let's say, on my research or those of my colleagues as well. I understand that the audience is partly technical, partly non-technical, so I've tried also to simplify some of the slides in order to keep everyone in the flow. And if you disconnect, I hope you will be able to reconnect a few slides later. So Furfural, and last bit, more technical information will be available in those two reviews from 2012 and more recently 2024, and literature that is also cited in those reviews. And you can also have more details at the coffee break, of course. Start to thank a lot of colleagues from Shell and from University of Twente that have helped me through those 20 years of research on Furfural. And it will be too lengthy. I will spend all my 20 minutes to mention the contribution of everyone here, but certainly important to mention them. I could not have done the work alone. Furfural is a beautiful platform from which you can make a lot of molecules. You will have, oh, the point is not really strong. You will have at your left side some fuels, and non-technical will recognize the symbol above, and the chemists will love the chemical structure below. You will see on the bottom oxygenated intermediate. Some could be good diesel component, others excellent octane booster for the gasoline. And at the top you will have longer chain molecules that could be good diesel component and also SAF. And we will discuss SAF in a few minutes. But Furfural can also lead to a number of chemicals that you'll see on the right, also symbolized by the packaging that you will have on the top. Some of those components are commercial today, but most of them are not yet commercial and are just emerging, made from Furfural. Some of them are still commercial, but from fossil feedstocks. Now, you can also make them from Furfural. And in view of time and the focus of HIGFLY, I will focus on the fuel and not discuss much on the chemicals, but we could have a whole lecture on that one as well. So if we can do a lot of molecules, to be able to do them, we need to have Furfural at big volume and low cost. Can we have that? Big volume, Furfural is can be extracted from biomass. We could get some 10% of it, and we'll dive into some details there. And looking at the availability of biomass, we could imagine making Furfural at the scale of 1 billion ton per annum. Let's say 1,000 million ton per annum, which is bigger than the total chemical industry today, and which is very significant compared to the total oil demand. And the SAF is about the same as the chemical demand today. So we could have potentially on Earth, of the biomass we harvest, talking harvest biomass, we could have enough with Furfural to do quite a bit. But we don't make that bit because Furfural today is just 400 kiloton per annum, 500,000 tons per annum. And why so? It's just because it's too expensive. So the name of the game is now, if we want to use those big volume, big application, we'll need to drop the cost. And that is why in the first part of my lecture, I'll focus on making Furfural and try to make it cheaper than we do. On the second part, I'll go back to the fuel, say, well, which kind of fuel we can make. And Fernanda showed us a couple of examples of SAF. I will also touch 2 examples in there. And in the third part of the presentation, I'll discuss economics. Because if it is not affordable, it doesn't make sense to make it, it will never happen. And we'll discuss a bit of crude economics on those concepts. So let's start with Furfural manufacture. Can we make it cheap enough to, let's say, unravel all the potential that is in there for building blocks? Starting with the old process, the Quaker old process, which is based on cooking biomass in hot water with a lot of energy. You can distill off 10% of the Furfural as a vapor and recollect, condense of the Furfural. And you have 80% of the rest of the biomass which is decomposed, a kind of tar sitting at the bottom of your pot that you may want to clean, that you need to clean, and eventually you burnt to produce all the energy to cook the pot. That's how we are doing it for about a century now, which means the process is batch. So you fill the pot every single time, you can't have a flow here. The process is small scale, 5 kiloton per annum, modest yield, about half the theoretical yield you could get from biomass, and it's chewing up a lot of energy. It is all the rest of the biomass to distill off a bit of Furfural. And you can realize those are bad starting point for having Furfural affordable. That's why Furfural is so expensive. But we can do better, and to do better, we need to use the biomass better. For those who are not familiar, the biomass is eventually composed of fibers, cellulose fibers embedded in hemicellulose and lignin as a matrix gluing everything together. And now, if you can disentangle those components, you can treat all of them separately with minimum efficiency, a bit like Fabiola just has done, and then you can have better return on the total. So what we'll do is indeed a mild cooking. In a mild cooking, you can decompose a little bit, separate the component, and then treat them ideally, again, as Fabiola did, but we have a lot of alternatives to do that. So we can get the silent here, which is the blue part from the silent, we can get them in the juice, in the syrup, with water, and isolate the cellulose and the lignin. The silent will be used for degradation to Furfural, and the cellulose and lignin, let's say the cellulose will be used for paper, ethanol, succinic acid, and what have you. And the lignin can be used for composite, for instance, also used for fuel. So you can use all those components to ideal solution, giving you much better yield, but you will need more processes because not only you have the mild cooking, but also all the step downstream to make your product. So that will be, of course, investment intensive, and we have seen pretty heavy figures of investment for the Fabiola, for instance. But this is a route that will give you the yield and therefore will give you the economics. So let me not dive into, let's say, the mild cooking, and let's assume it will be Fabiola. It will be a good case to start with. But we'll then focus on the top part. How can we then take the silent syrup in water, maybe a bit of acid in there, in water, and convert it to Furfural. And the most promising route today has been, and that is around for quite some years, maybe some 20 years or more, is biphasic dehydration. When you take the whole syrup, you contact it with an organic phase, you dehydrate at high temperature, now you go high severity, you convert the xylose to Furfural at high temperature, and you extract the Furfural into organic phase, isolating it from itself and isolating from unconverted sugar, isolating from acid, and therefore you avoid degradation of the furfural. You keep it intact. In doing so, you have much better yield, 60-70% molar percent of the silent, versus less than 50% that we have in normal process. So altogether, we boost the yield of furfural by a factor of 1.5. So quite significant. And we have looked at shell with some colleagues, particularly with Juben here, and a lot of colleagues as well in Houston. We revisited that biphasic dehydration more thoroughly and tried to add a couple of twists to further improve the economics. And those twists are the arrows you have in red here. We'll have a fractionation, let's call it again Fabiola for simplicity, followed by separating the pulp from the juice, which is the block, the square in the middle, and we'll send the juice to this biphasic dehydration that will be in contact with an organic solvent. We will take a heavy boiling solvent that will come through the bottom of distillation column, from which we top just the furfural for maximum energy efficiency. More to that, we'll take the water that's coming out of the dehydration and send it back to the pretreatment. And why so? Because we'll use the acid, we minimize the water that we use, which means also minimize the wastewater treatment. And we'll have otherwise a huge wastewater treatment plant to clean up the water before we discharge it. No, we don't want to clean it. Recycling as much as we can, and we only purge a bit of that stream for recycling. We have a final loop around the fractionation where we recycle the juice to build up the sugar concentration, to have all the other equipment, let's say, cheaper, being more compact. Such process have the advantage of being continuous, bigger scale, bigger yield, and lower energy demand. We have looked at the biphasic dehydration and the integration of both by looking at the solvent selection, with an example here, but also looking at the reaction kinetics, closing all the recycle loop to see what are you accumulating in the recycle loop, looking at distillation product workup, metallurgy. We have sulfuric acid that will corrode your metallurgy, which kind of steel do you need, looking energy balance, and much more, in order to understand what it will take to have that process flying over here. And that has been an approach that we have followed. We could dive more in details, but I will not have the time to do that. We could do another approach, and the one that I'm working on for quite some years now at the University of Twente. We try to reverse the concept and say, what about if I will extract the silos from the water, put it in organic medium, and do everything in organic medium? And we know that when we put pure sugar in organic phase, we get furfural much better yield. But you need to distill all the water out of it to have a bit of sugar. Typically it's 5% sugar, 95% water. You don't want to distill it. How do you do the extraction? Because the sugar wants to stay in water, doesn't want to go in organic. Well, we use a trick extraction of organic solvent together with organic boronic acid that is reacting with OH, capping the OHs and making the molecule highly hydrophobic. Doesn't want to go into the water, goes into the organic phase for 80-90% yield. As you see from the figure here, you'll need 2 boronic acid to cap all the OHs, and you have beautiful selectivity. Good, so we have, and the beauty is you leave the other sugars into the water. Acetic acid stays in the water, a lot of crap stays in the water. So it's really selective for the silos, and we can discuss why it is, but not yet. But then we have now that sugar in the organic phase. How do we get it to furfural? Well, we learned that we will need to add water to do back to hydrolyze the ester to do the reaction. And we have 2 routes that we have developed, but one for today, one is only taking water with a high load of salt and an acid. All high temperature, the acid is doing the hydrolysis. The salt is there to avoid the furfural and the silos really to get into the water and push everything back into the organic phase. And now you we are reaching selectivities of 90 more %. We were below 50 with the old process, went to 60, 70 with the biphasic. Now we are 90%. So again, huge jump in yield and therefore advantage in the economics. The process could look like this one, fairly straightforward. You will have a first extraction where you contact your silo syrup with the organic solvent to take and the boric acid. You take all the silos into organic solvent. You have the water stream coming out. You send back to the pre-treatment to avoid water consumption. And then you contact that syrup in a second extractor at much higher temperature, where you do extraction with water, salt, and acid. And you do extraction and you push back the furfural back into the organic phase. So you have a very close loop of that water. And you put now your organic phase with furfural, you send it to distillation column, you top the furfural, bottom the rest, and recycle it all over the place. And we check all those recycle, and today, for the time being, we see no major showstopper over those ones. So much for the first part on making the furfural. So we do fractionation, and we can treat specifically the silo syrup for high yield using dedicated advanced technologies that were not available about a century ago, but are now really emerging. The rest of the biomass can be used for different purposes, increasing the yields. But now what we have the furfural, what can we do with it, and particularly going to the jet fuel. Here, I'd like to stress that we need two major actions here. Furfural is a fairly small molecule, 5 carbon atoms in the furfural. If you go to jet, we need typically 11 to 18. So we'll need to couple furfural to one another to increase the chain length, one. Then we will need hydrogenation to remove all the double bonds and put hydrogen in there to increase the heating value, the calorific value of the component. And also, by the way, remove the remaining oxygen that is really funest in SAF. You don't want to have any traces of oxygen in there. So we need those two steps, which means the process will be also complex. You will need to have those two steps. Typically, you may even need a third or fourth steps to do all those two fundamental actions. Multiple steps also mean will be heavy in investment. Particularly hydrogen is highly energetic. You release a lot of heat that will cost you money to dispose of that heat. Because we are losing all the oxygen, we are losing mass, we'll have a low mass yield on the product, which means a high furfural cost. Will make also expensive. We'll need a lot of hydrogen here, 0.4 gram per gram or ton per ton of hydrogen per SAF. If it is green hydrogen, and it needs to be, at the end of the day, it needs to be green hydrogen to have a really efficient SAF, to have a low carbon footprint SAF, that will be also expensive. Of course, we can start with fossil hydrogen, as I had in discussion during one of the break. We'll start with fossil hydrogen, but eventually you'll need to go to green hydrogen to really have a sustainable aviation fuel. So all of this already warns you SAF will be expensive. Okay, and we'll come to it in a minute. So how can we do it? I have two routes just to sketch rapidly. And the first one is one that we developed together with Jeroen about more than 10 years ago. We hydrogenate the furfural to furfuryl alcohol, and then we simply do an alkylation, self-alkylation of furfuryl alcohol itself. Once we have the oligomer, we do hydrodeoxygenation to remove the oxygen, saturate everything, and have your SAF component, which will be nice linear alkane. And if you want branching, you do isomerization on top and you have your branch alkane. Or you combine your isomerization together with a HDO and you have directly your branch alkane. The tricky part is oligomerization, and we have spent quite some effort in there. And eventually it appeared to be fairly simple. A tiny bit of sulfuric acid, not much, really low concentration, in water, mild temperature, you see even not cooking water, low pressure, and the furfural alcohol is oligomerizing itself. And interestingly is, as it gets oligomerized, it gets hydrophobic, doesn't dissolve in water, and goes to the top of the water. You can skim it off, and you have a simple separation of your feral alcohol, of your oligomer. Very easy. What we are getting is eventually fairly good selectivity, 60–70%, to fairly high conversion. And my selectivity is defined up to the tetramer. Of course, we get some heavier component, which are valuable as well. Some could be used for heavy diesel. Eventually, we may have a tiny bit of lube oil if we want to, let's say, yeah, lube oil. But so all the product is valuable, but we already have 70% into the SAF range. And if we would add some solvent, anisole and MTHF, you see those crosses at the corner. If we will add some solvent, we will help extraction of the oligomers into the organic phase, and we even boost the yield by a few more percent, by some 10%. Eventually, the reaction appears to be fairly simple. That is the first example. The second one is one of the examples that this is also being studied in the HIGFLY project, that we are also investigating for a couple of years already, converting the furfural food to cyclopentanone. That's a tough part, that's a tough step. And because it is tough, we don't want to do it too much. So we just do one furfural to cyclopentanone and take two other furfural to do the coupling. Not everything to cyclopentanone is too difficult. So we do, that's the second step, cyclopentanone and two other furfural molecules, we get to the C15 skeleton that we need, HDO, and we get, in principle, to the SAF. We are looking with Rick at university, we are looking at the chemistry of all those three steps, and there are various ways to do that chemistries, and we are looking at how we can couple those various ways to find the way that is the simplest, where we don't have pH changes in the chain, we don't have pressure changes, solvent changes, etc. So we look at the complete process integration to have the smoothest path through all those three steps. A first paper is already out there, the other one are in draft, and you will see more coming into the literature, and in view of the time, I will not dwell too much on those ones. But it's also a fairly promising route to make SAF, as the HIGFLY colleagues have already found. So we can make it, we can convert it, and can we afford it? And I'll make a very simple economics. We have many ways to do complex economics, but I like the simple stuff. And we'll have here a very simple equation. The product price times the yield is the money you get out of the plant. And that needs to be higher than what you put into the plant, which is the feed price and the conversion cost. And we'll have fairly crude premises for those various prices, and we can plug them and see how the prices are evolving here. We do that here for the furfural manufacture. I put the yield under the bar here to identify the product price. Some premises you will see on feedstock conversion costs, and also on yields you will see in there. And when you plug it here, what you'll see how the product price, the average product price of the biorefinery is dropping as you increase the yield. Very high when you only make 10% furfural. Now you are going 35% furfural, plus you make more furfural because better yield, but you also make, for instance, ethanol, or you make lactic acid, even better yield. You make more yield product. You see the average price of that package is dropping very, very significantly. I would even say dramatically. So don't spoil your biomass. Have good utilization of the biomass. Of course, I need more steps for making the ethanol, making the furfural, the ethanol, lactic acid. So my conversion cost, which is a crude figure per step, will be multiplied because I don't need one step, but now I need 3, 4, or 5 steps. So my conversion cost is increasing significantly, but the yield gain is more than is sufficient to offset everything and have your total cost coming down. We can do the same game now with the Furfural valorization. The same equations, we take different, let's say, the same premises for conversion costs, different premises now for the feed cost. Of course, Furfural is expensive. Mind you, I'm taking here $1,200 per ton Furfural, which is today's Furfural price. Not yet speculating on how cheap I can make it, because I could go much lower than that. And then comparing the price versus the market price of various components. And the thick red line is the poverty line, the market price. So all dots coming close to the line are competitive today within those premises. They could be competitive today. That's the case for butanediol, pentanediol, maleic anhydride, interesting building blocks that can be made from Furfural. Others are much more expensive. Butadiene is way above the parity line. SAF, way above the parity line. Eventually, they are following the kind of 200% premium, meaning 3 times the price of the fossil equivalent. So SAF will not be on fossil equivalent, would be 3 times the price, maybe 3.5 times the price, according to these premises. No surprise, that's the price of SAF also from vegetable oils. So this very crude method already is getting you in the right ballpark, but don't dream to have SAF on the fossil equivalent. You will need heavy premium and therefore good regulation or mandate in order to support it. And with this, let me conclude with just a few key messages. We have the promises to make now Furfural at much lower cost than we do today, with new technologies that are continuous, larger scale, and do much better utilization of the biomass by not destroying it, but fractionating it and utilizing all the components. And we have new catalysis, new technologies that are emerging to use it for a variety of applications, being SAF by coupling an HDO, or being oxygenated chemicals. You've seen maleic anhydride and butanediol, for instance. Try to keep the oxygen in the molecule. You'll get your money for it. And those ones will be affordable without premium. If you go to pure hydrocarbon, you will need mandate and premium in order to be able to afford it. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple of questions before the break. Any?
Yes, thank you for the very interesting talk. So you mentioned this boronic acid process, I think. Do you first move the xylose to organic phase, or is that in the same process where the conversion happens?
Really, really good question. The boronic acid is fully organophilic. It stays in the organic phase. But we'll do a coupling at the interface, or that is what we believe. We do a first coupling on the interface, where we'll have one boronate on the xylose, and from there on, we pull it into the organic phase, where it gets a second boronic acid and then stays there.
So in our experiments, we run usually at higher temperatures. And for example, for SBP, you get a lot of mutual solubility. So do you run at lower temperatures? And if not, is it really still a defined binary system? Or?
The extraction is on the fairly low temperature, somewhere between room temperature and 90 degrees Celsius. You don't want to go too high in temperature because it will cost you just heat exchanger. So the extraction is done best at modest temperature. But when you have the extraction, you separate the two phase and you only send the organic phase at high temperature for the dehydration.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Good questions. Thank you.
Hi, one small question. I saw quickly the price of hydrogen. I believe it was the price of grey hydrogen. It's €2 per kilogram. So I've seen reports of TNO that it was about 14. So I think there's a lot of room for.
Yeah, certainly. And if you, I'll say, if you will take the price of green hydrogen today, the consumption that you have of 14% hydrogen per furfural, the hydrogen cost will come about half to 2/3 of the furfural cost. So the furfural price will certainly increase as well. Yeah. And yeah.
Well, quick question concerning the oligomerization of furfuryl alcohol. So you make apparently very good in shape in terms of the chain of the you are making. How you control the extra oligomerization, because you are using hydrogen and sulfuric acid, I think. Yeah.
No hydrogen.
No
hydrogen is only to make hydrogen only to make the furfuryl alcohol.
Yeah.
Then everything is hydrogen free, low temperature, low pressure, and I controlled oligomerization by reactive extraction, by having the oligomer separating. And if that control is not good enough, then I put an additional solvent to extract at earlier stage. And then I have a boost of 10% selectivity, and we will need to optimize further the extraction and solvent selection in order to boost the yield. But you may wonder to which extent you need to go, because all the heavies are also valuable, being heavy diesel or being lubricating oil. So you still get money from it. So those are not losses.
Thanks.
Is there probably time now to go for the coffee? Do you want to? No.
Okay, thank you very much. I was also curious about the boronic acid system. I noticed that your selectivity is great, but the system seems to be much lower. So suddenly you go into the 3-4 hours and conversion is not full. Have you looked into, let's say, CAPEX as well? Because at the end, we tend to see also CAPEX being a big driver in the techno-economic evaluations. So I tend to see, of course, the yield is the driver, but well, have you looked into that?
We are looking into the CAPEX, and indeed long reaction time, which is more expensive, particularly when you have to go to a high temperature and therefore also higher pressure. You still have a lot of water in there, so you will still have a high pressure. But the yield gain is more important than the CAPEX. And you'll see in the last economic figure, when you increase, let's say you increase the yield, you have a dramatic drop, even if you need to put more steps and more CAPEX. So I can give, and we have done that, for instance, I typically use a CAPEX of $200 per step, per ton product and per step. I can put a 300 by saying, give it 50% penalty on it. It doesn't really matter. Okay. The benefit is large enough.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any more?
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Yeah, just a quick question. Where are you in terms of TRL? Because in particular, the new stuff that you presented is getting really interesting for the market. So, are you? It's
still low TRL. It's still low TRL. We have done, let's say, for example, on the extraction, cyrus extraction, followed by dehydration, we have spent one PhD student to discover the chemistry. Now I'm spending a second PhD student to do the pre-development, trying to have equipment design, to have the thermodynamic ready, have the kinetics ready, closing the loop, optimizing eventually the component to minimize the loss, etc. But we are still fairly low in TRL, probably somewhere between the 3 and 4. So quite some way to go still.
Okay, thank you. And how robust is then the boron chemistry? Does it survive more than one cycle? Is it between catalytic and stoichiometric? I mean, where are you?
No. The boronic acid needs to be fully catalytic with really low losses. It's just too expensive to lose it. So we have to watch for the losses being chemical loss or physical loss. Physical loss, when you look at the loop, are you losing it in the water? Are you losing in various phases? And we are optimizing the boronic acid to minimize those physical losses. Now for the chemical loss, it's pretty heavy, robust chemical structure, so I'm not really fearing a significant chemical degradation of the components, more the physical losses.
I think we need to stop now before I get told off by Fernanda. So time for coffee, and is it how long? Okay, 30-minute breaks. So I'm sure we'll be able to ask more questions for the two speakers of this afternoon. Thank you.